Okay, I'm Tracy Wyrick Cassidy from Tokshnuk Watershed Council, and this is a joint effort between Tokshnuk and the Victory Garden up at Mosquito Lake Community Center. So this presentation or this workshop was originally going to be in person, but just due to COVID precautions, we decided to do it as a Zoom presentation. And I'm really glad that we did, because we have 7 presenters who are all presenting on different methods for fermenting food. And so this workshop is going to teach participants how to preserve and utilize produce from their garden, as well as food that can be harvested from the Victory Garden. So like I said, we have 7 different local presenters who will each be sharing their knowledge and experience with fermentation. Each presenter will talk for about 5 minutes about each subject that they're talking about. So some of our presenters are talking about 2 different things, and they'll be talking for a little bit longer than that. If you have questions during the presentation, we're just asking participants to please use the chat feature, and I'll be monitoring that, and I will let the presenters know if you have any questions. And then at the very end, when everybody's done presenting, we'll have a more in-depth conversation. And that's when you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question out loud, or you can continue to use the chat feature. Let's see. So, okay, just to remind everyone that this presentation is being recorded. And so we'll be sharing this on Tokshnuk Watershed Council's Facebook page and website, as well as through the Mosquito Lake website, the Mosquito Lake Community Center website. So our first presenter tonight is Gina St. Clair, and Gina is an experienced gardener here in Haines and was interested in presenting tonight because it creates a super healthy food which lasts for months from plants that you can grow in your garden. And she will be presenting on kraut and equipment. So Gina, I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Okay, you ready? Okay, so I'm going to start with equipment. I have been making sauerkraut for years and years and have gone through a progression of different kinds of equipment. I started, I've used plastic containers, I've used crocks with lids, and I've also lost a lot of sauerkraut just because it was too hard to control the bacteria. So what I've evolved to is using glass jars and airlock lids. And so what happens is that the sauerkraut starts fermenting, it produces carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide pushes the oxygen out, which is what you want. And the airlocks prevent oxygen from getting in. Oxygen is kind of the enemy of fermentation. So you want to get the oxygen out. So you can use it. There's a standard lid. This is the one that like winemakers use. You put water in this and it keeps the oxygen from going back in. So that's one that I use here. And then this other one, you know, I found it on the internet, and it's a waterless airlock lid. And so this little center part is the part where it pushes the oxygen out and it doesn't go back in. So it's this lid. And Tracy has a picture that she'll show at the end with information on it. Nourished Essentials is, I believe that's what it is, that makes this one, and you can get it on Amazon. And it also has this cool little, it's called an oxygen extractor. And so it's for after your kraut has been, you know, fermenting for a while and you want to taste it. You can take the lid off, taste it, put the lid back on, and then you put the oxygen extractor on the end and you can pull the oxygen out. And that's nice because after it's been fermenting for a while, it's not as active. And so it's harder for it to push the oxygen out. So these are half-gallon jars, and I really like this size. And you can use quart jars as well. So this is just really, I haven't had any failures with this method. So it's what I use over and over. So now I'm going to move over to the equipment for making the sauerkraut. I use the food processor. It's a nice way to just get it done quickly. This sauerkraut, I use the kind of the cheese shredder blade. And so it's really fairly fine. I like it like that, but you can also use the bigger blade. And of course, knife and cutting board work just as well. Oh, this is maybe the most important piece of equipment. This is the inexpensive kitchen digital scale. And I will tell you why this is so important. The other equipment is the weight. This is a weight, and if you buy the kit for these lids, some of the kits come with the weight, and I recommend the weight. So for making sauerkraut, you take your cabbage, and as you can see, you can use red cabbage as well as green cabbage. Run it through your food processor or your knife and cutting board. And then you want to weigh it because the amount of salt you put in depends on the weight of your cabbage. I'm going to talk to you tonight about the 2% recipe. That's what I use, is 2% salt to cabbage. And the reason that is so nice, because you can use any size of cabbage because you're starting with the weight of your cabbage. You're not like a lot of recipes say, use 5 pounds of cabbage. Well, maybe you don't have 5 pounds. So you're using the weight of your cabbage. And then, so you put it in the bowl, you weigh your cabbage, and then you calculate 2% salt, which is 0.0, you take the weight of the cabbage times 0.02, and that gives you how much salt you add. So this cabbage weighed 1,000, and I use grams. I actually use grams because that's going to be your most accurate measurement. This cabbage weighed 1,061 grams. So I took 1,061 grams times 0.02 and came up with 21 grams of salt. So you just get a consistent product every time. Now, there's another reason that it's really important to weigh the salt as opposed to measure it in a measuring spoon, is that you can use a lot of different kinds of salt. The only salt you don't want to use is iodized salt. So you can use the canning salt, doesn't have iodine. You can use pink Himalayan sea salt. You can use a fine grind or a coarse grind. And all those different salts, if you only measure with like a tablespoon, you're going to get a whole bunch of different measurements of salt. Whereas if you weigh the salt, it doesn't matter what kind you use, you're always going to get the correct amount of salt. So weighing the salt in the cabbage you're going to get the most consistent results. So then what you do, you add your salt to your cabbage. I usually do it in a bowl. And I massage it. So I just gently rub the salt into the cabbage, and then I let it set for, you can let it set for half an hour or an hour. What the salt is doing is drawing the water out of the cabbage. Then I start putting it into my half-gallon jar. And a lot of recipes say that you pound it, and I kind of quit pounding cabbage because it just seemed wrong. So that's why I like the massage. And then I just use, I find a kitchen utensil like the end of I have a rolling pin with a flat end, and I just push it down. I push it all down firmly. And then the water, or the brine that the cabbage has created starts to rise. I use one of the outer leaves of the cabbage, and I'll cut a circle, and then I put that down, and then I put the weight on top of the cabbage and push it down. And you want to make sure everything is covered with brine. If your cabbage didn't make enough brine, then just make more brine, and you do that. You use this 2% again. So you would weigh maybe a cup of water, take that weight times 0.02, and that tells you how much salt to add to the brine. So you're getting a good brine. So, and then you just leave it on your kitchen counter and wait. After a few days, you'll start to see bubbles coming up. And the other cool thing about this lid, it has a little, this little thing that turns around, and there's numbers here. So you put the date that you start your ferment on. So like this one, I started it on the 12th of September. And so it tells me that. So then I know how long it's been fermenting. And this is actually ready to eat. So what I'll do now is I just take this lid off. I replace it with a regular, I just like to use the plastic lids and keep it in the refrigerator, and it will keep for a long, long time.
Gina, do you want me to share your recipe?
Sure, you can share the recipe, and I thought people could maybe take a screenshot of it if they want, and the same with the little advertisement for the lids.
Let's see. Okay, can you see it?
Not yet.
Okay, let me try again. Okay, I'm going to keep working on this, but for some reason it's not allowing me to share. So let's go ahead and move on to our next presenter, and then I'll make sure that Gina's slides pop up at the end. Okay, so our next presenter is, and thank you so much, Gina. Yeah. All right, so Molly Sturdivant is going to be presenting next, and she is going to be talking to us about how she ferments sodas and gluten-free sourdough. So thank you so much, Molly. I'll let you go ahead and take it away. Oh, and Molly, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So my favorite thing about fermenting is being a mad scientist in the kitchen, basically experimenting with food science. And the stuff that I ferment is more an art than a science. So there's a lot of leeway in what you can do. Sometimes I totally wing it, and sometimes I follow a recipe more or less. And sometimes I try to get systematic and make comparisons to see what effects different techniques and different ingredients have on your end product. Sometimes I even remember to write down what happened. So a little bit later when I talk about rhubarb soda, I'll show you one of my experiments. So except for sourdough, I've only been fermenting a few years, and I'm still learning for sure. That was a great presentation, Gina. I learned lots of new things right there. But the thing that has been challenging is that in the last 10 years, I first went gluten-free, and I'm actually grain-free and sugar-free. And so now basically I follow the keto diet. And so that means that when I'm fermenting, I have to do a lot of alternative things, non-traditional things, both in sourdough for the grain-free flours that I use, and in things like kombucha and soda, where I really want to limit how much sugar I use or the kind of sugar. So, so even though if you have gut issues with the phytonutrients in, say, cabbage or other vegetables that you eat, fermenting helps break those down and make them release the nutrients and make them more absorbable for you. And of course, the microbes that you're adding to your gut can help you with issues like leaky gut. So it's kind of a trade-off in balancing the benefits and how to make it work. So just a few general things about fermenting. Gina's hit some of these as well. No matter what you're fermenting, there's certain things you kind of need to pay attention to, and how the actual, say temperature depends on what you're making. And sodas and sourdough are no exception. While home fermenting is really pretty forgiving, you'll get a better product if you pay attention to your temperature, your sweetener and starter media, and how close your ferments are together on the counter, and how long you ferment. So I often have several things going on at once, and I have to label things and keep track of dates and stuff. For temperature, my house is pretty cool. It's only runs about 60 to 65 degrees. So that slows down fermentation. So for my sourdough, I use, now why am I not seeing full screen? All I'm seeing is Tracy, but hopefully you guys can see this. So this is my yogurt maker. It's a Euro cuisine, and the temperature on this thing runs fairly high.
Molly.
Yeah.
So just with the filter that you have, it's a little blurry. So if you hold it right up in front of you, then we can see it.
Okay, so like that. I mean, I'm not sure what I'm seeing is what you're seeing, but anyway, so that's my yogurt maker. It's probably familiar to all of you. And I do my sourdough starter in here. I use a, what are these called? Gas ring reducer, which is for your gas stove. And I raise my sourdough off the bottom of the yogurt maker, and I don't put the lid over the yogurt maker so that there's air in there to reduce the temperature. And you're not going to be cooking your sourdough that way. With yogurt, obviously you'd be covering everything up. For my kombucha, I use a seedling mat. So you guys probably have those for your greenhouse to start seeds. And I just tape this around the vessel that I'm fermenting in, whether it's big or small. Some of my vessels, I have these little stick-on thermometers. And so, wow, I'm warmed up to 72 degrees on this side of the house.
Molly, we can't see it because of your filter. It's blurring it. Yep, now we can. Yeah, you have to hold it right in front of you so we can see it.
Okay, sorry about that. I haven't ever done a demo on Zoom before. So besides the sticky thermometer, you can also just use an instant read thermometer that you stick in your liquid. Like I mentioned, you want to watch out about contaminants on your counter. I used to keep my my little bucket for compost in the kitchen, and I discovered the hard way that if it's too close to my sourdough starter, it might contaminate it with mold, even though it doesn't seem like there's mold happening. And always with these aerobic fermentations like sodas, you don't have a lid on them, and you want to keep out contaminants by covering with a cheesecloth or a coffee filter or a tea towel or something like that. Then on time, you know, how long you ferment anything is going to affect how, along with temperature, how it tastes, how it turns out. So sodas, once they use up the sugar, will start to be sour, and you want to taste it periodically to find a level of sweetness that you like, and then that's when you cap it off and refrigerate it while it's still slightly sweet, and you use it within a week. Same with sourdough. The longer you let it ferment, the more sour it's going to get. So I am ready for my slide, if you can get that up there, Tracy. This is about my one of my rhubarb soda experiments, which I did in the summer. And I used cooked rhubarb. There's a photo at the bottom of this. I don't know if it can be full screen. So I used cooked rhubarb, blended it in the Vitamix and strained it. I had a half gallon in each of those three jars. I sweetened with about a half cup of raw honey and coconut sugar. And in each different one, I used a different starter, about 2 tablespoons, and no extra heat. This was at just room temperature in the summer, so it was running about 68 to 74 degrees. And you can see on a couple of those jars, there's the thermometer strips. So in this first picture, you can see that this is about a day in, and the 3 starters are there on the bottom. And the jar on the left that was started with the kombucha tea is very activated. So that was really quick. Now, if you go down to the next one, Tracy, this is about another day and a half later, and you can see the middle one, if you look at the small jars in front, that is started with sauerkraut juice, has started really kicking in. But the third one using kefir whey is still running behind. And then on the next slide, 4 days, that one with the kefir starter has caught up. So in the end, they all worked, but the time varied. And I think I would stick with the kefir because, as you can see in the little table that compares how the taste was and the timing, I felt like the kefir one was sweetest, and there was no spiciness from the kraut or tea taste at all. Those were also good, but if you really want your rhubarb flavor to stand out, the kefir whey doesn't add any extra flavor. So in the last one here, these are different sweeteners that I use. Like I mentioned, I really try to keep the carbs low. So this is just kind of a lineup of things I keep in my house, my pantry. Organic raw cane sugar, honey, coconut sugar, lucuma powder, chicory root syrup, cassava syrup, agave syrup, inulin prebiotic powder. And then those are all ones you can use or try. But the last one, that the monk sweetener, is a no carb keto sweetener. It's made with erythritol and monk fruit and stevia. So there's no carbs, and it won't work. It just simply won't work. So it's all a trade-off. Let's see. So just for that's coming up here. I'm not quite ready for that. So in other experiments, I have used raw rhubarb juice, so no cooking, and that worked great too, especially if I didn't try to cut the sugar. When I tried fermenting the cooked pureed rhubarb, strained, but I did not add any starter to help it, it got moldy. So it's worth doing the experimenting to kind of figure out what'll work for you in your situation. And I think you can do any, similar comparison in any kind of soda or juice type ferment, but there's probably a different optimum combination for every kind of medium that you ferment. So moving on to grain-free sourdough. So you can scooch down a page there, Tracy, please. Thanks. Making grain-free sourdough starter and feeding it is pretty much like the traditional method that uses wheat. You just mix your flour and water roughly 1-to-1 for a thick paste. You keep it warm and you feed it a couple times a day, and it'll get very bubbly and active. And then when it slows down, it's time to feed it again. Then when you're ready, when you feel like it's sour enough, you go ahead and use it in your baked goods. And partly I go by smell with that. I really like the smell of sourdough, but you can tell when it's getting more and more sour. For starters, I don't like to use anything. Just pick up air or yeast from the air. That's the traditional way. But some people do add a booster, like you can add kombucha tea, you can add apple cider vinegar, raw live apple cider vinegar, whey from yogurt, or you can even add yeast and sugar, and any of those would speed up your process. So here are some grain-free flour alternatives that I have used or tried. Now, a lot of grains are gluten-free. Bean flours are gluten-free, but they're not low glycemic index and they're not low carb. So unlike a lot of people, I don't use gluten-free grains like buckwheat, sorghum, rice flour of any kind, or millet flour or garbanzo bean flour. Those are commonly in the commercial gluten-free flour mixes. And also really common is arrowroot starch and tapioca, which are highly processed, pretty devoid of nutrients. And even though they ferment really well, I don't like to use them. Down next is, so there's the list of the different ones. Sorry about that. So this long lineup of relatively starchy grain-free flours are common in my house. You want to go back up, Tracy, please? There's teff flour. Teff is an ancient grain. It's what Ethiopian injera is made out of. That's a flat bread, and it's absolutely my favorite. I love the flavor. It's technically a pseudo grain, but it's the one thing that I allow myself because it works so well and it tastes so good. And then there's coconut flour, cassava flour, oat fiber, green banana flour, tiger nut flour, peanut flour, and then there's some seed and nut flours like sesame and sunflower and almond. The nut and seed flours are higher in fat and protein and lower in carbohydrates, so they don't really ferment well. And those are kind of my go-to flours that I use in regular baking or when I'm, using my sourdough into make bread. One that works really well is chestnuts. Even though it's a tree nut, it's pretty starchy, and but it's a heavy flour. And so these different choices really can affect the taste of your whatever you're baking. And for example, I can't imagine using peanut flour in my sourdough, but it would ferment well. So anyway, like I said, my favorite grain-free flour for sourdough is teff. And I typically combine that with a couple other moderate carbohydrate flours like the coconut flour, the oat fiber, and cassava flour. And those help lighten up your batter or your dough, especially in the end product when you're using a heavy flour like almond meal. Coconut flour and oat fiber, though, have a couple challenges. They're really absorptive, so you need a higher proportion of water when you're using them in a starter or other baking. And coconut flour is also kind of chalky, at least to my taste buds. And so, it's a kind of a balancing act trying to use enough, but to not get a texture that you don't like. Green banana flour is also low carb, but it also has a distinct taste and a texture you might not like in sourdough. So that's why it's important to make these sort of systematic tests. And I have done that. I didn't have enough time tonight to talk about everything I've tried. The bottom part of the slide is about binders used in your sourdough starter or bread, any grain-free bread for that matter. Because you're not using wheat, which has gluten, and gluten is what is the binding agent that holds your bread together. You got to find a substitute. You don't want to end up with crumbly bread. It's for a long time, I couldn't make bread that you could slice and make a sandwich with, and I really miss that. I got it dialed in now. I mostly use psyllium powder and flax meal as binders. But in sourdough specifically, these don't work that great. They produce mucilage when they come in contact with liquid. And so I'm almost done. And so that's just really undesirable. And so I like using xanthan gum. Similar to xanthan is guar gum, konjac, or glucomannan. Those are additives used a lot in commercial products. They're made from natural ingredients. Konjac is a root that's a traditional Japanese ingredient. You might have seen miracle noodles in the store, and that's what they're made out of. 0 carbohydrates. I don't know how that happens, but that's how it is. Anyway, so small amounts of any of these binders are fine, especially if you use some coconut that kind of helps absorb. But I'm really still experimenting for the best combination in sourdough specifically. So I think that's about it for my tips and experiments. Oh, this was just kind of fun to throw in. This was from our fermentation workshop in 2018 when Sandor Katz was here. And I love having a Zoom medium, but I'm really hoping we can do something like this again in the future. It was just such a blast. I took a lot of pictures and just had a blast watching everybody squeezing cabbage. So hope that gives you some ideas. And are we skipping questions?
Sorry, I've got several screens going right now. Yes, I think, let's see, we don't have anything in the chat. So
Okay.
We're going to hold off on questions and we'll go ahead and go to our next presenter. Thank you so much, Molly.
You're welcome.
Oops, I'm not going to mute myself quite yet. Okay, so our next presenter tonight is Erica Merklin, and she is going to be talking about her kimchi ferment. Thanks, Erica.
Hi, that was a really great presentation, Molly and Gina both. And you're gonna all probably think I'm a big hack now when I give my presentation, but I am going to kind of show you the way that I like to make my kimchi. And every batch that I make pretty much has been totally different, and really like I mostly base it on about, I was really trying to like think through what my recipe is, but I'd say it's like probably about 70% cabbage. And so I have cut up some cabbage here that you can see. And I like to use a food processor to do that. So I'll just slice it into smaller sections and then run that through the food processor. So that's the big bulk of what I make the kimchi out of. And then I like to add like carrots, which I slice up. I kind of put them on the grating mechanism for that. So they're smaller, and I have kind of like made them into just like rounds and added those. And I didn't really like it as much because they just were so big, and they were like too firm in there. And so I really like kind of having the carrots a little bit smaller. And then same with the onions. I just slice those up. So I'll add onions to that too. And kind of anything else too that seems like it could be utilized from the garden. For example, I have some things here, like this is some stalks from Brussels sprouts and from beets, and I'll just cut these up and put them in there. Also, kale stems too work really well. Anything that's kind of firm, like I don't add like beet greens, or even I've added kale to it before. And I didn't really love the way that like tasted in the end. It just kind of softens up a little bit too much. So things that are firm, I think, are really great to experiment with and add. I got a bunch of bok choy from Sally at Four Winds Farm. And so I made some kimchi with that, which was actually really, really good. And that's like more of a traditional way that kimchi's made. But so the thing with kimchi, you know, I kind of like did a little bit of reading on this in Sandor Katz's book. And there's like over 100 different ways to make kimchi, or I should say types of kimchi that Koreans make. And the big thing with the kimchi, what's noticeable about that, or kind of is its signature, is that it's spicy. And so they add a lot of like red pepper flakes. I like to add, what I have here is I made, this is a mixture that I made that is habaneros. And so it's habaneros with lime and apple cider vinegar and garlic. And so, and a little bit of salt. And so I'll add a few tablespoons of that kind of to taste. And then the other thing too in kimchi is I don't think you guys can see this, but it's fish sauce. And so I like to add a few tablespoons of that, like depending upon how big of a container I'm using, which I'll get to that in a sec. But then also, like, you know, you could use other types of seafood, like some types of shellfish, or even oysters, I guess people will add that to it. But I really like the addition of the fish sauce to it. And or anchovies too, I guess people add. And ginger. I think that's a really like key ingredient. And so what I'll do when I like to use like a bullet, and I'll put my garlic and the peppers and the ginger all in there together and get it really blended up. I was chopping it and putting it in there, but I think that it just gets in the liquid a lot better, and it just becomes like it's gets into all of the vegetables, I think, better that way. And then sometimes I'll just add little bits to it because it is kind of fun to like just bite into a little bit of ginger. And so basically, like sometimes I'll use like a 1 gallon, but mostly I don't know if you can see that back there, but that's my big 5 gallon because I figure if I'm gonna start making it, I'll just make a huge batch. And then I pretty much eat kimchi a couple times a day. So I go through it pretty quickly. But what I like to do is, you know, I'll just kind of layer it. I'll put a little bit of green and a little bit of red, and I put a little bit of salt in there too, and kind of just massage it like Gina was talking about. And then, so I don't have like a precise recipe for it, but I definitely always use, you know, like I said, the majority of cabbage, carrots and onions, and then anything else that I can get from the garden. And so then what I'll do is as I'm doing it, I'll add a little bit of salt to it too. And then after I massage it, I let it sit for a few hours, because a lot of the water is then, like through osmosis, is removed from the cabbage and the other, you know, the onions and carrots too. And then I'll take the mixture of the peppers and garlic and everything. And when I blend that up, I put a little bit of water in there, and then I pour that over and massage it again. And then after another hour or two, I'll top it off with just enough water. And so then over the next couple of days, I'll taste it and see if it needs more or less of something. And so since I'm not a real precise measurer, I sometimes I tend to err on the side of caution as far as not putting in too much salt, and because, you know, you can always add more salt. But if you do find yourself in a situation where you've added too much salt, sometimes what I'll do is add more vegetables to it. It seems like if you add cabbage and you're a few days in, you can kind of run into a situation where you might have the cabbage some cabbage is softer and some is crunchier, which, you know, that can be fine too. But I'll usually try to add more of something that can ferment pretty quickly, that's softer, like the onions or the carrots. And so that can kind of help to mellow out the taste too, if it's too salty, or if it's too hot. And then according to some Korean academics, they say that the best way to make kimchi is to let it ferment 3 days at 68 degrees. And so my house is like Molly's. I'm a little bit more on the cool side. So, I mean, I've noticed in the summer, you know, I don't ferment as long, but kind of in the shoulder season, it seems to take maybe, I'll let it go like 5 to 6 days. And it sounds like Gina's ferments are a lot longer for her sauerkraut, but I like mine to be a little bit more crunchy. And it seems like it's pretty zesty still like in the beginning. There's a lot of like carbon dioxide in there, and it's kind of bubbly. So that's when I like to put mine into jars, and then I put it in the fridge or a cold spot and it lasts months and months. So yeah, that's basically how I do my ferment.
Erica, there were a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Do you use a specific type of cabbage, or do you use Napa cabbage?
You know, I use, I don't use a specific type, but I always use a green and a red because I really like the color of having the red in there. And then it seems like if it's only red, it's too much. So, but I love like for this is a Napa cabbage, but I love the Savoy cabbages too. And the other thing I didn't mention is that I like to use this Himalayan, this pink Himalayan salt, you know, and just like, you know, it's just important, obviously, not to use iodized salt, but I really like that flavor.
And Molly also wanted to know, do you drain the massaged cabbage mix before adding the spicy liquid?
No, I don't drain it. So I add the salt, and I know that like there's different kimchi recipes where they would add the salt and then drain that, but I don't do that. I just add the salt and then keep all that liquid in there and keep all that salt in, and then add the spice. And I experimented this last batch with adding turmeric because I thought, oh, that sounds real healthy, and that'll probably be really good. And I would give it 2 thumbs down. I don't particularly like it, but now I have 5 gallons of it. So I'm going to learn to love it. But I would just say, if you're going to make an experiment like that, just experiment on maybe just a little bit. But yeah, were there any other questions?
Nope, those are the only questions in the chat.
Okay.
All right, well, awesome. Thanks so much, Erica.
Thank you.
All right, so moving on to our next presenter, we have Ariel Rolfe, and she enjoys fermenting because it's always an experiment and it almost always tastes delicious. And so Ariel is going to be showing us how to make beet kvass and ginger bug.
Hi. So I'm kind of just doing more of a show and tell. But I'll start with ginger bug. This is, I don't know if you can see it there. This is just the remnants. Usually I have a full container. And ginger bug, I guess I should start with, is it's sort of like the starter culture for making fermented sodas. And yeah, so you just chop up, some recipes say to grate it, but I think that just the fermentation goes a little bit too quickly. So I like to do this more of a mince. And you add sugar to it and water and let it do its thing. It takes about 5 to 6 days for the starter culture to work, and you add more sugar and more ginger every day. And it should be fresh, organic ginger. it really doesn't work as well with non-organic. And I've tried different kinds of sweeteners as well, and sugar is really the best one. I've tried it with demerara and honey, and I think I tried it once with sucanat too, but really just you have to use the cane sugar. Yeah, and so once you have your ginger bug, you can start making different kinds of sodas, and it really works with almost anything. I've made strawberry rose, was really good one time, and let's see, I've just tried lots of different ones, lots of berries. This one is my high bush cranberry, and you can see I use the pickle pipes for these, even though I often don't, but they're easier. So, and you can see the pressure building in it. This one took about 3 or 4 days after you add the ginger bug and the cranberry juice. And I put water in here too to dilute the cranberry. Yeah. And then this is the one I'm currently working on, and it's a rose hip ginger bug. I made a little bit bigger quantity this time. This is a gallon. And so this one I actually added 2 cups of the ginger bug starter too, because I was making so much, and I also am leaving soon. So I just figure I might as well just use this up. It'll help speed the process along too. Yeah, and I think I saw a question on there about how long does it keep for. So once you have it to like your desired sour level and your sweetness flavor, you'll want to put it in the refrigerator. And I would say it lasts quite a long time, but as long as it's in the refrigerator. I'm trying to think if I've ever had it go bad. The only thing that's happened is sometimes it can get a little funky. So if you have it sitting out for a little while, sometimes it'll pick up different kinds of, bacteria in the air. And like if you're fermenting other things like kimchi, that's the main thing that I think is important with the ginger bug, is keep it away from like weird other ferments that are going on, so that it doesn't pick up those bacterias or, whatever is going on in the air. And you should be okay. And it could go a little too long where it might get vinegary. Yeah. And then the other one I was going to talk about.
Ariel, there's one other question on here. Do you add the different flavors after you have the ginger bug starter for a few days, or start them all at once?
Oh, so yeah, if you're doing multiple, that's a good question. So it is kind of like a sourdough starter, where once you use it, you're going to want to feed it again, build it up. And another point about this is I do keep the ginger bug starter in the refrigerator, and when I want to use it, I put it out on the counter for most of the day, if not a whole day. And so it gets back to room temperature to reactivate the fermentation process. And then I'll use it for starting just one flavor. If I want to do 2, I'll have to rebuild that a little bit more, the starter. So I would start them different days. All right, so the other drink that I was going to talk about is the fermented beet kvass, which is kind of reminiscent of the sauerkraut, but very beet heavy in flavor. I really like it. It has like a little bit of a sweetness and then the briny flavor. And I use it a lot as just like a mood booster tonic, and I drink it in the morning to kind of pick me up and wake me up. You don't need a lot, just like a little glass of it is plenty. And it is important for the organic, again, for this to work. And there is such a thing as the beets being too clean, because I have wasted some beets that I bought from the store, and they were washed too well, and there was nothing really left on them, it seemed like. But yeah, so this is normally I do my beet kvass in either glass container or a crock, but all my crocks are taken right now, so I'm using this food grade plastic bucket with an airlock on it. And I cut up all of the beets. I take off the nubs and the stems, and I cut them into, I dice them into about a 1/2 inch. You can't really see right now because it's starting to do its thing, but I cut them into 1/2 inch pieces approximately, and I don't peel them usually. And add salt and water, unchlorinated water, and just mix it up and let it sit. It varies in time, like everyone else, very temperature sensitive. And my house is wood heat, and it's really small, so it goes all over the board. But I try to keep it around 65 to 70 in here when I can. And yeah, and then it usually takes, depending on how big the batch is, usually like a gallon batch might take 7 to 10 days. But I just did a batch that was 3 gallons, and it took over 3 weeks for that to ferment. And hopefully this one will take a lot less time. And like Erica was saying too, around the shoulder seasons, I have much better luck fermenting. It's a little more consistent, but now it's getting cold, so yeah. Oh, and then this is the final beet kvass product, and it's also called Russell. And I just wanted to point out this book is one of my go-to books, Fermented Vegetables by the Shockeys, Kirsten and Christopher Shockey, and they make a lot of different fermented books. But this is my go-to one for the kvass recipe, and they have variations too, like ginger and lemon. Oh, here's some questions. I have not tried the gingerbug for beet kvass, but I could see that working. I don't see why it wouldn't. Yeah, I feel like that would be a fun one to try. Make it a little sweeter too. And then what was the other? Do you throw the beets out after it ferments to drink the juice? I'm experimenting with different things with the beets. Roasting them, I think, is just fine to do, and eating them. I also supplement my dog's food with them. So she gets a little probiotics, and she loves beets. So I try to use them. Sometimes I compost them if I'm just running out of things to do to cook, and yeah, running out of time. Yeah.
All right, well, great. Well, thanks so much, Ariel. It's very interesting. And I think those are all of our questions for now. So we'll move on to our next presenter is Dawn Hotch. And Dawn enjoys fermenting because it is a great way to preserve food while making it more easily digestible. And so Dawn is going to show us how he makes miso and natto. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. I'll let Dawn go ahead and tell us.
Hello.
Hi, Dawn.
So
We can hear you.
how do I change the camera?
Can you turn your screen on? If you click the camera, oh yeah, there you are. You can see you.
Okay. All right. So what I do with the miso is soybeans, and the natto is the soybeans as well, but it's a different strain of bacteria. The miso is a koji, inoculated rice, and the natto is like a whole different strain. The natto is more heat friendly, or I guess heat strong. 114 degrees is usually about the breaking point for most bacteria. And I think the natto actually goes up to like 123 degrees. And natto is kind of a acquired taste, because it gets really filmy, stringy, slimy. It's more of like an okra a mouthfeel. And the miso is, it takes about 6 months for that to be edible. And the miso goes into most sauces, like barbecue sauces, spaghetti, tacos, things like that. Adds umami.
And Don, how do you use the natto?
The natto is pretty much a traditional breakfast. Yeah, it's from Japan. They make a pot of rice, and they break a couple eggs inside of it. Raw eggs, you stir it up inside, and then you have the natto with it. It has it's a really acquired taste. Either you like it or you don't. There's almost like no way, there's no up in between for this one. Either you like it or you don't. When I make the natto, I do probably about 2 cups of soybeans, and then I do 4 cups of water, and I put it in the Instant Pot, and I cook them. I take them out, and once the temperature hits about 120 degrees, that's a good time to inoculate it with the spores. It makes it a lot stringier. Koji. Oh, you're talking about koji. No, somebody just asked me a question. Sorry. Anyway, so the spores go in about 120 degrees, and it makes them a lot stringier. The stringier the natto is, the better, because it brings out the flavor. Yeah, it's good for the stomach. It's good for digestion. The nutrients that are inside the bean are easily digestible, absorbed. There was a question.
I think it was the question that you already answered. Oh no, wait, there is another one up here. For miso, do you grind up the soybeans before cooking or leave them whole? And what is the process for that?
You don't have to. You can leave it as chunky or as mealy as you want to. It's basically pretty much your choice. For me, I like to do half and half. I like half mealy and half chunky. I like to see the beans. And I also like the beans to be absorbed. The process of it, it's changed. It's my process has changed. Since I got the Instapot, it only takes like 90 minutes to cook beans now. So you take the beans, you cook them, you take the liquid that's at the bottom of it, and you set them both aside. And then you process the beans. You grind them up as much as you can, or as much as you want to. And then you take the liquid and you, at a certain temperature, about 120 degrees, you put the spores in there, mix it up, and then you put it on top of the beans. And then you cover it for a night. It's pretty fast. It's pretty quick. It's a lot faster than miso.
And someone was just asking, where do you get the spores or the inoculant?
Oh, hey, love. Can you grab that box?
Which box?
The container of the natto moto.
It's right there.
Like it.
You order them online.
That's what you want to order.
And order it on.
Most sites say that you don't do it under or above 115 degrees. I learned from Natto Dad on YouTube that you actually go a little higher than that.
And Jan, how long does it take for the natto? Did you say that already? There's a question, does it take 24 hours or is it more than that?
24 hours.
Okay.
It's fast.
Mm-hmm.
It's delicious. It smells like stinky cheese. It smells like a brie.
And how long does it last?
If you freeze it, probably about 4 weeks. If you don't freeze it, it's probably about 1 or 2 weeks. You got to keep it refrigerated.
All right. Well, thanks, Don. Is there anything else? Oh, let's see. There, it looks like there's another question. Oh no, Gina says she had it in Japan and the mom added some soy sauce and sugar to it and served it over rice for breakfast. And oh, just like what you described, Don.
That's exactly it.
All
You
right.
always want to have it with breakfast. I don't know why you. It's always good. It's always good in breakfast.
All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing that with us. And see, it looks like we don't have any other questions. So we'll go on to our next presenter, which is Jill Evans. And Jill ferments because it's healthy and tastes good. And she is going to be talking about kombucha.
Hi. Everybody hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, so kombucha. What you need is just a kombucha starter. obviously I don't know how to make a SCOBY, which a SCOBY is a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. Yes, so you'll need a starter. I actually make them by the gallon jars, and I do 4 gallons at a time, but this is one. Looks so gross, but it is really delicious. So yeah, my recipe is pretty simple. I actually use more green tea. I remember the first time I tried kombucha and I was like, I didn't like it. So I tried somebody else's kombucha and she used mostly green tea. So I've been following that recipe and I absolutely love it now. And I introduced it to a lot of people who didn't like kombucha and now they like it. So green tea is the trick. I usually use like, see, for a gallon, I'll use 7 bags of green tea and 3 bags of black tea. And then you brew your tea and you add 1 cup of sugar per gallon. I do 4 gallons at a time and I just put them all in gallon jars. You can buy those 4-gallon jugs that have the little spout on the bottom, but I just do the jugs. Let's see what else. Kombucha is really simple. So yeah, I let it ferment for a week. You can go longer. People will let it ferment, and the longer it ferments, it just gets more vinegary. I like to strain it after about a week. And when you strain it, I always take the very first top cup off and you put it in your jar. I just get a quart jar and you put your 1 cup from the very top in there with your SCOBYs. And then strain it in jars. I always get people reused glass jars because I like the glass. And I put them in there and you store them in the refrigerator, or you can keep them on the counter and they'll make more SCOBYs too. And when you get more SCOBYs, I get like they grow every single time you brew. And so I have SCOBY hotels and I have like 3 or 4 of these just full of SCOBYs for if anything ever happens, or if I just want to give them away. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I use organic cane sugar. I'm sure you can use other sugars, but I haven't tried any other ones. Let's see. Yeah, that's it.
You know, Jill, I've always wondered, because people make flavored kombucha. So how, like, if you want to add other flavors, when do you do that? Do you do that while you're fermenting?
I do it after I strain it and put it in your jugs. I always mix juice in it. Like I will steam my own blueberry juice. My favorite one has been the blueberry sour cherry mixed together, and you put the juice in it. I've never actually fermented it with the berries in it. I always add the flavor after. I love doing apple juice in it too.
That sounds good. What temperature is best for fermenting, and does light exposure matter?
I try to keep it in a dark spot, but I don't think the light really matters. I keep it in a little cubby hole. And the temperature, yeah, it likes it warmer. I think it's pretty much with any fermenting thing, it likes 70 degrees. Yeah.
All right, so if we're interested in starting, you've got the extra kombucha.
SCOBYs.
Oh, yeah, SCOBYs. Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, great. Well, thanks so much, Jill.
Short and sweet and to the point.
Okay, so we've got one last presenter, and that is Lori Mistrella, and her favorite thing about fermenting is keeping the flavor and nutrition of the garden going all winter long. And she's going to talk about Thai hot pepper sauce.
Okay. Am I live? Okay, so grew these next to the Sunshine Farm greenhouse. And they are Thai peppers, and the seed came from Sabina at Gomi's Garden. So if you can get any from her, I would. They I love peppers and I grow a lot of them. And these were probably the most prolific. They're hot and I like peppers. I love all peppers and I really like heat. So I had a lot of these. I had an excess of them and I thought I would try making some hot sauce. You can use any kind of pepper and any combination of pepper, but since I had a lot of these little beauties, that's what I've been doing. And this is really simple. You just chop them up, put them in a jar, and it's a salt ferment, and it's a generous teaspoon to a cup of water, and then I just pour the salt water over the top of them. I don't know if you can see this. And then I just sink the peppers using a smaller jar like that. And I put a bowl under it because it's gonna start bubbling out. And I like a warm house. For my 70 or maybe even warmer house, it's about 4 or 5 days. I think a cooler house, obviously longer, but I'm always popping the top off and tasting them. And when I like it, it's done. I haven't done this too many times yet. I had one total failure, and I think it was from using slightly underripe peppers, and it was just inedibly bitter. But the success I had, it was incredibly delicious. It was incredibly simple. So you can call it good once you like the flavor with it coarsely chopped like this. But if you want it like a Tabasco, you can just throw it in the blender, and that's what I wanted. So I threw it in the blender, tasted it, and it was just about the right amount of salt, but I thought it needed a little balance. So I put a spoonful of honey in there, and I still wanted a little more, and I put a little bit of cider vinegar in there, and then it was perfect. It was delicious, and it was gone so fast. And so obviously, I made this little, micro scale for demonstration. If you could ever grow enough peppers to do it by the quart, that would be spectacular. And you could certainly use any grocery store peppers, but I think you'd want, like Ariel's been saying, I think you'd want to stay with the organic peppers if you can get them. Anyway, that's a pretty short, sweet, and simple. And I want to do more with some different pepper varieties just to see what the flavors are. But so far, I really like these Thai peppers. They're hot. It's a good spicy sauce, and it looks nice too. So that's about all I've got on a pepper sauce.
All right, awesome. Sounds great. Thanks, Lori. Okay, so I did figure out how to share my screen. So I'm going to go back to Gina's here and share her recipe. Okay, so this is, let's make sure this pops up. Okay, so this is Gina's recipe. Oops, oh, make it really big. Not quite that big. Okay, for her sauerkraut, her 2%.